Inshul, Falchi Kriel Harshal, Origo Toos. A very warm, hearty welcome to the second episode of Toos Indigenous Perspectives. Each month we'll have a different guest from somewhere else in the world, and we'll hear about their lifeways, language, and lore. And this month's chat is with Dr Hana O'Regan from the Tahu, South Island Maori. And I first met Hana about 4 years ago, just over 4 years ago, after we've been chatting for a couple of years and sharing our ideas and things. And we had a wonderful meeting. They came and visited us, Hana and 40 friends from the Maori people in Glasgow for a ceilidh, and then out to Dunad in Argyll. And I still have my toki that I was gifted, which is a wonderful thing to be able to have. And the chat went fantastically well. We pre-recorded, given the time difference. It was a really good weather, and I hope you enjoy it too. So here's episode 2 with Dr Hana O'Regan. Tēnā koe, Kari.
Kia ora, tēnā koe, hoa.
Good to see you again. You're looking well. It's been a full 4 years since we last spoke face to face, either digitally or in person.
I don't know where those 4 years have gone, Hoa, but it's lovely to see you as well.
You too. So I'm going to introduce myself as my people would introduce themselves. Is Misha Agev, Machgemish Vik, Ich Gemish Vor, Ich Geremich, Ich Gemish, Ich Gorachi, Ich Gemish, Ages Ha Misha Kuchach, Nambal de Chlamich Lodge. So I've recited my patronymic, so that's my father's going back 7 generations, and I'm also, broadly speaking, belong to the clan Cloud. Would you be able to introduce yourself in your language as you normally would?
Kia ora, wo tēnei te mihi atu kia koe, ko tēnei te mihi atu o auraki mauka kia koutou, ko auraki te mauka, ko waitaki te awa, ko te Waipounamu te waka, ara ko te waka o auraki. Nei rā ka hapu o ka tirake amo o ka tirua hiki hiki I te taho taku hākoro e mihi atu ana kia koutou. So firstly, my mountain, my tribal mountain of Aoraki, of the mountain of the people of Kaitahu of the South Island, mihi, and send our regards through to your mountains. My river, my tribal river is Waitaki, and my canoe is the canoe of the South Island on which we reside. And in that vein, we greet you. I te taho taku hākui, e karaka atu ana ki tō koutou taha, me o koutou mauka, he uri tēnei o te whānau o McTaggart, nā reira ko au tēnei tētahi o ka rāwaho e mihi atu ana. On my mother's side, I'd just like to make the link that our roots go back to Scotland. We are from the McTaggart clan, from the clan of Ross, and with those connections, I come to you tonight, and I'm very excited to be a part of this conversation. Kia ora rā.
Wonderful, wonderful. Ngā mihi. Falche Kriel Harshal, Gunchiko should be got Toos. So a very, very warm welcome to Toos. For the viewers watching, myself and Hana have been in touch now for about 5 or 6 years, I think, altogether. And you also visited us with a good number of your people about 4 years ago. And we had a good old knees up on a Friday night. And we also came into ceremony together in Dunad in Argyll. And somehow I had managed to not have this information filtered down in my mind yet, that McTaggart, of course, Machtagarst, that's an Argyllshire name. So when we came into ceremony together at Dunad, you were very, very close to where your people were from. And in fact, there was a castle which was recently uncovered by lowering water levels, which belonged to the McTaggart people in sight of Dunad. So, in fact, the connection deepens.
It was one of the most memorable times of my life to be there and participating in that ceremony and feeling the connections of my ancestors of both sides, being able to celebrate them with you, and but also bring my Maori side from New Zealand to that place. It was an incredibly special moment.
I would echo that. And our small band of intrepid Gaels were so nervous, but when we heard the Maori prayer just on the level of the dune just below us, that just blew away any sort of doubts. It really cleansed the atmosphere there. The atmosphere has been different there ever since. And it really blew away a lot of negative energy for us in that place. It's been, the atmosphere has been so much more receptive since the Maori people visited us. So the honour was impossible to put into words in any language. So that's our connection. Fantastic to see you again. I wonder if you would indulge myself and our viewers just with an idea of who in general the Maori people are. Where do you come from? How did you come to be in Aotearoa?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I'm hoping that the audience knows that where New Zealand is geographically in the world. I mean, we're a little island in the South Pacific, but I'm hoping you've got some kind of geographical reference. But the origins of the Maori people, we are people of the Pacific. We are East Polynesian by origin. And that means when Polynesia was settled, it really was settled that came down through, we're part of the Austronesian language family that came down through Southeast Asia, from the Philippines, from the space of Taiwan, the Philippines. They moved in to what we now refer to as Polynesia. And the first prototype of our languages, our culture, our people, were based in what we call the Western Polynesia, which is Samoa, Tonga, and Fiji. And from there, they moved east. They went up to Tahiti, to Hawaii. And the last migration out was pretty much through to Easter Island, the Cook Islands, and down to Aotearoa. So Aotearoa, New Zealand, was the last significant landmass to be settled in the world, really, and through the Pacific. So linguistically, we're connected to those of really closely to East Polynesia. So pretty intelligible in terms of our languages with Tahiti, the Cook Islands, Society Islands, and Hawaii. But we're quite a distance away from them, but that's where our origin is. And so my people in the South Island of New Zealand, there's the North and South. Our tradition has us arriving first in the north and finding that place was pretty much preoccupied, and so journeyed south to, if you can imagine, the world, the difference in terms of the world that they encountered. The South Island is colder. It goes from sub-Antarctic in the south, in the southern ends, to subtropical in the northern ends. And these were people coming from the tropics of East Polynesia into the first time they would have seen snow, the first time they have entered into that world. And those were my ancestors that travelled those seas and then settled the South Island of New Zealand, the Kaitahu people. So I use my dialect. Some people in the north refer to it as Ngaitahu. So the Ngaitahu. In the south, we use our dialect changes the NG to the K, and so we call ourselves the Kaitahu people.
So is that the same change as for a person, and you'd say tangata, but you would say takata? Is that correct?
Absolutely, yeah. So the word for Indigenous people is tangata whenua. In the south, we would say takata whenua. And it's a bit weird. I'm one of a few people in our tribe that still uses our dialect, that has learned our dialect and uses our dialect. So it's still quite weird, different to most people who use the language. But I'm somebody who espouses who takes the position that it is a legacy worth protecting and holding on to. So I use our southern dialect.
I completely understand, as you know from our discussions over the years, myself and my family essentially speak a dialect, and unfortunately, very sadly, we've lost the last of our elders just over the last year for the dialect. So it's now just myself and my family who speak it. So we are quite genuinely a dialect island. So I understand very much, that resonates with me strongly. And you just have to take the position that there is a richness in it that speaks for itself, and hope that you can be a worthy vessel of that and to take it from there. So as I understand it, there was more arable land in the North Island than in the South. Would that be correct in saying that?
There's arable land in the south, but the problem is that we don't have the same temperatures. So the south is colder, and at the moment we're in the middle of winter. So we have, in the morning, I'm walking out to ice and frost outside, and the staple that the Maori brought from through Polynesia, what was the kumara, the sweet potato.
Yeah.
Now that grew well in the north, so they developed an economy based on the production of the sweet potato, of the kumara. In the south, there are only a few pockets where it grows, and so basically the difference in the culture, the adaptation to the environment, meant that my people were established a culture based on hunting and gathering, and of seasonal migration across the South Island. And when we've got, in the middle of our island, we've got the Alps. We've got the Alps. And it's no mean feat to get from one side to the other. So our people they had base settlements, but they would have connections across with what we call hapu, or our clans across the island, where they specialized in the production of certain foods, and they would trade with other clans around the South Island to keep as the basis of their economy and as the basis of their subsistence. So yeah, we've got fertile lands, they're just not warm fertile lands, and so we have had to adapt to the climate. And like I said, in the south, right down at the end of the island, to sub-Antarctic temperatures, that really can be quite formidable.
Yeah, indeed. It reminds me, in fact, of the Scottish situation, whereby the eastern, southern portions of the country are extremely fertile and quite dry, and then the north and west it's less possible to grow a great range of things. And the Highland people retained much more of a hunting culture and relied much more on that side of things than they did on planting crops. So to move on to a darker period in history, then, with contact coming in, and when did you first start to see European settlers arriving in Aotearoa?
Well, Captain Cook arrived in the late 1700s, but we had, when we talk about settlement, that was really from the beginning of the 1800s. And so I know when we compare ourselves to our Irish and our Scottish and our Welsh relations in Europe, we're talking many hundreds of years after colonization occurred in those areas. But I have to say the tools of colonization, almost like the blueprint that was used to colonize the Gaelic Isles, were introduced to New Zealand, and the same techniques, the same tools were used in the colonization of places like New Zealand. So in the early 1800s, we start to see sealers and whalers coming in. They were the first wave of migration. And at that stage, Maori was still the dominant. Maori still were what we call the mana whakahaere. They were in control. They had sovereignty over their own lands and resources, and negotiated with the sealers and the whalers around access to resources, etc. But when we get into the mid-1800s, so like 1820, we start to have the first clashes in terms of settlers coming over, people wanting to come to New Zealand to settle. And that was the difference. Yeah. So most places in the Pacific, it wasn't colonization for settlement purpose. It was colonization for the exploitation of resources. But there are a couple of countries, pretty much us and Hawaii, that we used as places to resettle populations from other parts of the world, from Europe, from Ireland and Scotland. And so what we started to see was a pressure in the mid 1800s, with more and more people, both from France and from England, coming through to New Zealand. And we have a treaty that was signed in 1840 that was supported by many of the chiefs from around the different tribes of the country, because they were worried about the unruly behaviour of the people that had come to our shores and wanted to get the Queen pretty much to sort out their people and to establish some protocols of engagement going forward. So it was an interesting time. So pretty much from about 1840, where the treaty was signed, we can see changes in the way that settlement and interaction and engagement happened in the country.
Mm-hmm. And at points where the settlers were engaging in pretty negative extractive behaviour, as I understand it, the Maori at times very fiercely resisted this. And I often talk to people about the Gaels from Ireland and Scotland being the most feared fighting force in Western Europe and being a real, force to be reckoned with. And then I read about the Maori, and I think, oh, I wouldn't want to take them on, So I understand that there was pretty fierce, stout resistance from your people whenever things became more extractive and more obstreperous from the settler point of view.
We had different experiences in different parts of the country, and so it's fair to say that as you can see, there's a bit of a Gaelic heritage going on in me right here, right now. But I can say that, we have the way that New Zealand was settled was quite different in the different jurisdictions. So we had, in my tribe, a very early contact, but because we were a hunting and gathering culture, because we worked on seasonal migration, it was actually easier to colonize the South Island. They pretty much, we call them this autocracy. They came in, they set up house, and they just claimed the lands. And we turned to Christianity quite early on and believed that they were going to be people of that word, and believed that the promises made would be upheld. And of course, that didn't transpire. But in other parts of the island, other parts of the North Island, there was colonization by right of confiscation. So the Crown confiscated huge regional areas. It's almost like the Highland clearances. In the way that they approached it. They didn't need really any kind of justification. Somebody might have slighted someone, and that gave rise to the justification to take thousands of hectares off someone else. So, they used whatever tool they could to empower themselves, and none of it was really just, and it didn't actually abide by their own laws. But at the end of the day, for my people in the South, we actually entered into a series of contracts of sale. What we ended up having to take a grievance against the Crown for the failure to honour the contracts that we had entered into. 90% of the South Island we sold, and we asked to reserve 1/10 of every fair average piece of land for our people to inhabit, along with schools, hospitals, and churches. And the Crown never did good on that 1/10. And so within a 20-year period, all of our land was gone. We were impoverished. We were dislocated as a people. We were disenfranchised. Our communities were broken up. And of course, when you break up communities and you can't live, you have no high density areas of people, you also suffer language loss very early on. And that's what happened with us. So my tribe pretty much the first to suffer systematic language loss within all the tribes of the country.
And this leads on to closer to our present day, with a claim for rights to do with land, isn't it? Your people were quite heavily involved in how did that work?
So the treaty was signed in 1840, and our land sales happened pretty shortly after. We had sold blocks of the land, but within, like I said, a 20-year period. So the first one was in 1844, and it went to 1864. But very quickly we saw that the contracts weren't being honoured by the English Crown, by the Crown. And so our first claim against the Crown for the injustices and the failure to deliver on what was promised was actually in 1849. And my tribe had the longest unbroken petition in terms of fighting for those grievances in anywhere in the country. And it extended 150 years. It was 7 generations of an unbroken petition for the fight for justice that was settled around 22 years ago now. And so in my lifetime, that 7 generation, we are now in the 8th generation, but it was 7 generations of unbroken litigation, unbroken petition against the Crown for their failure to honour their side of the bargain.
And the really difficult thing, as I understand it, is the idea that so many generations were engaged in that struggle and never actually got to see the boon from it.
Absolutely.
It's quite tough to reconcile, I would imagine.
So it is tough to reconcile. And when you think about our language and culture and what it meant, I think of those generations. So my father was actually the chief or the leader of our tribe that brought us into settlement. And so my life as I've grown up has been dominated by the conversations around, or the rhetoric, the conversations around the claim. We call it the claim, te kereme, against the Crown. And that legacy has had a profound impact on my life. But when we think about it, every generation, they would give of themselves in a way which was complete for this fight, where they never expected to see the rewards come to them in their time. So we had this whakatauki, or this metaphor. Yeah, it's a metaphor that says, a saying that says, "Mo tātou ā mo ka uria muriake nei," for us and our children after us. And that refers to the fight, that it's not, although we're fighting for ourselves, we're actually fighting for the generations to come. And in the early 1900s, one of the ancestors from my village, from my marae at Moiraki, said, had this other proverb that said, he mahi kai hoaka, he mahi kai takata. And that translates, he mahi kai hoaka, the work that devours the greenstone. Oh, I'm not wearing greenstone, I'm wearing bone. Our jade, which is one of our...
I told you just here, so...
one of our most precious stones. So the sandstone is the only thing that can work the greenstone in pre-European times in New Zealand. And it was a laborious task. It took a long time, but the beauty that was left was this precious gem. There was this precious stone. And that proverb said, as the sandstone devours the greenstone, so will this labor devour our people. There will be generations that will be consumed, but at the end of that work, we will have something as precious and as beautiful as our greenstone. And I think of that, and I think that's the difference between us and the colonial powers, was that it wasn't for immediate gratification. It wasn't for things that we thought were going to come to us in our lifetime. This was a fight that we knew had to be intergenerational, like the intergenerational fight for our language, and that we would give of ourselves in a way that would ensure the perseverance, the persistence, culturally, linguistically, and just by being here, of our people in future generations.
So this is a tremendous legacy, because it sets the tone for how future struggles should be engaged in. It's a way in which young people can look at that example and they can say, this is how we need to approach this going forward. We need to understand that we're part of a continuum. We certainly struggle a little bit here with that. There's a lot of individualism. People are looking for what they can get out of the language and the culture, not what they can invest in. So we could learn a lot from that. In terms of the language, then, at the moment, how many people then speak the Tahu dialect as things stand?
If we think of, so we are quite lucky in New Zealand, and I know this is completely different in Scotland. that we have one language and our dialects are all intelligible. We can understand each other. So they're not that different that we, you know, it might sound a bit different, but it's more like an accent rather than a whole different language. So with us, with Māori, even though the Kaitahu dialect is quite unique and has some peculiarities that others don't have, and the rest of the country have got a little bit used to me speaking it. It's still it has a high correlation with the other North Island dialects. Yeah. But when we think of our tribe, so Māori in general, about 23% of the Māori population have an ability to have a basic level conversation in Te Reo, in the Māori language. So 23% have conversation language, but that's at a pretty basic level, and it's also a self-assessment of their language proficiency. In the statistics that we use within my own tribe, we drop down from that 23% to around 11%. And even with the 11%, I'm thinking, where are they? Because I don't see them around. So my tribe have the lowest language statistics of anyone in the country. But we have a new dynamic that's occurring, which is quite exciting. And I think when I spoke to you, Adam, 4 years ago, we were taught we had been in the throes of our language revitalization strategy for a long time there. And I remember our Papa Timothy, our language mentor, saying, if these guys can do it, anyone can do it, because they've come back from literally the hole of the grave. They've pulled themselves out of the grave to revitalize their language. And I say that because when we started in 1995, we did a bit of an assessment of how many native speakers we had left alive at that time, and we identified 5. We had 5 native speakers alive in 1995. By 2002, we had 2 left. They lived next door to each other in the same town, but they'd had an argument, so they wouldn't speak to each other. You know, I know, right? It's like, really, is this really a thing?
So, with all due respect, sort it out.
I know. So these 2 had been raised with our dialect, with the language as their first language, but it wasn't part of their vernacular in their adult lives. So that was where we were, the situation we were in. And the last native speaker died in 2011 on the 5th of December. And of course, for us in 2011 in this region, we suffered the Christchurch earthquake. So everyone was worried about earthquakes, and they were pretty traumatic. And of course, my mind went to, what are we going to do about our language when everyone else is concerned with the task of survival, literal survival of their homes, their families, water, air, safety, hygiene, the extra effort that's required to invest into the language was, not an immediate concern. And so I farewelled our Uncle Jacko, who was our last native speaker, at our marae, at our village. And I lamented the fact that we had lost our last speaker. So within that time, we had been, I've talked about our language strategy from 1995. We'd had a vision. We wanted to do something different. We actually followed the edict of Professor Joshua Fishman from New York, this Jewish professor from New York, who we boldly actually in 2000 asked to come and speak to us. He was this incredible academic who had revitalized the Yiddish language. we thought, oh, well, why don't we just write to the guy and see if he'd come and speak to us? And so he came to our little tribe at the end of the extremities of the world in New Zealand, and he shared with us his insights on how to revitalize the language. And he said, if you want to bring a language back to life, it has to be in the home. It's all very well being in the schools and everything else, but if it's not an intergenerational language of transmission, then it won't survive the generations. And so we set about our language strategy, which is now, we've just had our 21st birthday, which concentrated on bringing the language back into our homes. And that's where we've ended up. So my children have been raised with Māori as their first language, like yours. Against the odds, against the tides, against the currents of popular discourse, right? You know, you're always pushing the boundaries. But they're not alone. We've got a small group, we've got a troop within the tribe who have committed likewise to the strategy. And in my family, they're the first in 5 generations to speak Māori as their first language. So against the odds, I guess that's that tenacity and stubbornness. Might be a bit of the Scottish in me too, the Gael in me too, that, you know, that stubbornness is like, we're going to do this irrespective of whether or not you think we can't.
Absolutely. And I gather that your great-grandmother grew up in a bilingual household. This was your Maori-speaking great-grandmother. But the English was the dominant language. And this was, I think was she born in 1870? Would that be about right?
Yeah.
Because my own great-grandfather, my own great-grandfather was born in exactly the same circumstances, of course, in a Gaelic speaking household, but with English just starting to become the dominant language in 1869. So just exactly the same time period. And he grew up, he must have been a speaker because all his older siblings were. But then when he went to school, English just took over. And then my grandmother only had a couple of phrases that she made sure to pass on to me, but had no command of the language. And it seemed very similar to your own story with Maori. Would that be correct?
Absolutely. So my great-grandparents were native speakers, and my grandmother was born in 1900, and Maori was not her first language. So even though her parents were native speakers, they didn't pass it on to their 5 children. So she had words at her disposal. She knew phrases, some songs. She was actually a beautiful singer. I don't know what happened there in terms of the genes, but and so she was a performer and would sing Maori songs, but it was very limited in terms of the productive element of te reo, of our language. Certainly when she had my father, she was quite old in those times. She was over 40 when she had my father. And she, would call him, she would use Māori terms. She would say, come, haere mai e tama, come to me, boy. She would use words for food and sing songs and those kind of things, and would use his Māori name for him. But pretty much it wasn't a part of the upbringing. And she died before I was born. My father ended up learning the language as a second language, but he didn't use it at home. So again, I had to start from scratch. And I think that's what we know, right? We know within language revitalization, if you don't pass it on to the next generation deliberately, they have to start from dot again. They have to start from scratch again. And that's when I made the call. Before I was lucky enough to be able to have children. I didn't think I could have them. And so when I became hapu, when I got pregnant with my daughter, I made a commitment to raise them speaking te reo, even though it was my second language. And, it wasn't easy, but I wanted to break that. I wanted to break that chain break the chain and literally give them the opportunities where they didn't have to fight for it. And interestingly enough, I thought that I was a bit probably over the top in terms of my lectures for them. I'll blame the Irish side on this, but I think I might have been a little bit harsh in trying to, hit home on the importance of language transmission and maintain.
I hear you. I hear you.
I actually, in my PhD, I wrote a chapter called The Intergenerational Transmission of Guilt. And the reason I did that is because, I would be like, ka mate te reo iakwe, the language will die with you if you don't speak to it. And because when they hit 5, they went to school and then they started talking English to each other. And I'm like, ki te kore koe kore I te reo, ka mate te reo iakwe. If you don't speak the language, you're going to kill it. Ka kōhuru koe te reo, you're murdering the language, And I honestly, that really hit home for me, Adam, when we had the earthquakes in 2011.
Mm-hmm.
So this was incredible. Christchurch literally was just shaken from our roots, shaken from our foundations. It was the worst thing you can imagine, that all of a sudden you're 4 o'clock in the morning and the house is just, we didn't ever experience earthquakes. Next minute you're getting thrown from side to side. It was incredible. And we lived at the beach. And I'm thinking, once I realized this was an earthquake, I'm thinking, we're done. This is gone. And there was this incredible moment. I went and yelled at their father to get one child. I went to get another. I managed to get all the children in the one place, and we got thrown up against the wall. And there was, it was dramatic. I managed to get all the children in the bed, and I'm like, right, we're at the beach. I need to go and get my survival kit. I had a tsunami kit. I needed to go get a torch, radio, etc. And my son started wailing. He was 6 years old. And he goes, Mama, ko, e mohio hea hai penei ai. He said, Mum, I know why this has happened. And I'm like, kei te pai tama e tau, ka haere ki te tiki te me whakora. Baby, just settle down. I need to go get our survival stuff. Yeah. And he was going, Mum, ko, Mama, ko, e haere, don't go, Mum. I know why this has happened. And I said, what are you talking about? And he goes, I kōrero Pākehā hau kia Manuhaya. I've been speaking English to Manuhaya, to his sister. The worst possible thing that had happened in their lives. He said the gods basically had been angered to the point that the world was shaking because he's been speaking English to his daughter. And you know what? This is the intergenerational transmission of guilt. You know what I did at that moment, Adam? You can think what a good mother might do. And then you can reflect on what I did. I said, no, darling, no. I said to him in Māori, it's not your fault. Calm down. I need to get a torch. But then I turned around to him and I said, but you really should speak Māori to your sister. The house was still shaking. The house was still shaking. So I just think,
that's an incredible story, though. Absolutely.
Yeah, incredible. I still cringe thinking about it. I'm sure it'll be something they remind me of later on in life. But such is the passion that we take, that we hold our dedication to our language for.
I understand only too well that the times I've found myself bursting into the room, because maybe they've spent an hour with their mum. So the language switches over to English because that's what she speaks with them. And then I've come home and then I come up the stairs and I overhear them speaking English. That's me into the room. So what are you doing? You're speaking in the language that murdered our language, And then it's like you walk out and you go, oh, wait a minute. I better go in and add something to that at least. Now that they've switched over, speak their own language again, I better go in and actually encourage the fact that they're doing that as well, just to balance it up.
Yeah, I share your pain, my brother. I share your pain. But, I think my children will joke about it. They will. But, the other side of it is they do not know what it's like not to have the language. And I think this is the thing we have to remember, right? My children do not know what the world is like to not have their language. And I remember I said that we had this strategy of bringing the language to, we had our tribal strategy was ko tahi mano kaika, ko tahi mano wawata, 1,000 homes speaking the realization of 1,000 dreams or aspirations. Right. Yeah, and that was by the year 2025, we wanted to have 1,000 homes within our tribe speaking our language. And I remember something coming up on the radio at the death of one of our language leaders. And my son, I'm driving my son to school, and he's going, well, that didn't work. And I'm like, what are you talking about? This is on the radio. I'm saying to him in Māori, what are you talking about? And he goes, well, there aren't 1,000 homes speaking the language, so that didn't work. And he's having this conversation with me in Māori, which is not a wise thing to do when you're the driver. You're driving and they're in the passenger seat and they're trying to have an argument with you. And I said, what do you mean it hasn't worked? We've got, and he goes, well, I don't know where those 1,000 homes are. That hasn't worked. The strategy failed. And I said, excuse me, just think about what language you're talking about. And so I'm having this argument with my son, who's saying to me that we hadn't achieved what we'd set out to achieve. And here is my son having the argument in the language with me. The language. And I'm like, he hadn't comprehended that the fact that he was speaking the language. Yeah. And having this argument.
And that's perfect. That's brilliant. That's just, you can't ask for more.
He could not comprehend where success lay in that picture. And I sat there thinking, I really don't want to rear end another car right now. I've got to keep calm. But it was just that point where I thought that this child has no idea of what it's like to not have the language. Like, they actually have to go out and learn it as a second language, to not have it as he has a choice that I didn't have, that 4 generations before him didn't have. Yeah. And it's beyond their realm of comprehension. And so I think we have to remind ourselves sometimes when we are coming down, the intergenerational transmission of guilt, we have to remind ourselves sometimes that they are the burden of success with our children is such that we have to also remind ourselves that what we have given them will mean that they don't have the same experience that we've had, and therefore will assess the landscape of language in a different way.
Yeah, without a shadow of a doubt. And it's very, very difficult to find a point on how different that mentality will be from ours, where we're scrabbling for survival, for years on end, just, tooth and nail, just to make sure that the language is passed on. And then they're just blithely blethering away, it's a joy, and also just a wee wry smile on the other side of the face, like, oh yeah. So what, at the moment then, does the future look like in terms of your te reo revitalization? What are the next steps that we can expect to see happening within the language community?
Well, within my tribe, I have to say we have had a bit of a turning point, and I think I might just be getting old within it. But just recently, in the last month, we came together, a number of us came together to celebrate our 21st birthday of our strategy. And I sat there with some of my nephews, or for our tribal nephews and nieces, and was able to bask in the glow of their amazingness, if that's a word. And it really hit me that even though we're certainly not through the woods, that within those 21 years, from clinging on to the side of the grave and pulling ourselves up, that we have the realms of possibility, the horizons of possibility are now more visible than they ever have been. Last year, the top national scholar for language excellence in the country was one of our babies. So competing against all the other tribes, that he took out the top scholar, one of my nephews who is a baby of our language revitalization effort, who's now 18. He's not a baby no more. He took out the top grade in the excellence examinations for the language. Awesome. And I'm now, the language of the next generation has surpassed mine. I am, whilst I was the language teacher and the mentor and the advocate and all those things, their language now far surpasses mine. I won't tell that directly to my children just yet. I think that I'll hold off just a little bit. I'll maintain some semblance of dominance just for a few years yet. But certainly, when you ask me the what's next in store, I'm really excited about the next generation coming, and it'll be the test. We know within the language world, and especially with Indigenous languages, the Professor Joshua Fishman's edict of it takes one generation to lose a language and at least 3 to get it back, right? I know we're not out of hands. I know that I've raised 2 children with Māori as their first language. However, the proof will be whether or not they raise their children. Until I've got grandchildren whose first language is Māori, I'm not going to rest easy. And so it's not that I'm encouraging. They've just turned 18 and 17. So I'm not saying that they need to go and produce baby mokopuna grandchildren for me straight away. Yeah. But like with the earthquake scenario, I've been sharing with them from a very early age the necessity to make sure that they respect this legacy of language, and that they raise their children speaking the language. I've said I don't care who you marry as long as they can speak Te Reo, as long as my mokopuna are raised with Māori as their first language, I'll be happy. And if they don't, well, then I'm coming to get the grandchildren, and I will be raising the grandchildren. So they know that.
That sounds very familiar once again, Hannah.
They've probably got their escape routes already planned. But I know where they live at the moment, and I'm making them pretty dependent on me so that I will be there. So, what's the future? The future is far more positive. The horizon of opportunity is more positive in this generation than it was in mine. We don't have to just envision a future. We can see it in front of us. It's actually tangible. The challenge now is to make sure we caress it and fondle it and nurture it in a way that makes it safe and keeps it safe for the next generation.
And what we have to do, I wonder if you agree with this then, is perhaps come back to some faith in what we have done and what we have managed to inculcate into our kids, that having raised them from birth with their own language and their culture and all that side of things, that even if at times there is, a little resistance to the heavy-handedness or whatever, that we've put enough into them that when it comes time to have their own kids, those patterns will then play out once again. We just have to have faith, I believe, that we've put enough in to see it then come out in the next generation.
I think the combination, my friend, of faith and fear. No, seriously. Absolutely, that we have invested enough into them that they have faith that it is not only possible, but it is desirable. When I say fear, the fear of me coming in and haunting them if they don't actually to do it. But I do think, as time has transpired, I think in the last few years it's been more challenging. But now they are seeing how rewarding what they've had at their disposal because of the way they've been raised, how it has helped them. Both of my children were passing their national examinations in our language 5 years before they needed to. That has helped them with their courses of study in science and maths and everything else that they've done. They have started to see, where they didn't necessarily see it before, but they've started to see the benefits of being bilingual and the ability to communicate cross-culturally. They, at 17 and 18, they now have a level of awareness which is really showing the benefits of bilingualism in their Indigenous language. And I'm pretty confident that they will, that investment in time and effort, I know, because it's the language of love, it was the language of our relationship. I know in times of stress, that's the first language they go back to. And I think that will hold us in good stead for the future. We have to be optimistic, my friend. Although my ability to speak, to hail back to my Scottish heritage and my Irish heritage has been somewhat limited. Māori is actually an easier language to pronounce and to learn. I absolutely think that by uniting together with the shared experiences that we have, the shared vision that we have, and understanding for the value of language and what it can do for us as people, but also what it can do in terms of our cultural identity intergenerationally, that solidarity that crosses nations, it crosses oceans, it crosses language boundaries. My children will benefit from being a part of a community that is globally located, Indigenous in every way, and has a view of the horizon of hope like no other. And if that's the legacy that we leave, what we do, well, then I'm a happy mama, I'm a happy hakui, I'm a happy mother.
Well, I was just about to say that we're getting to the end of our programme today, and I was going to tell you about a group of friends of mine called Gun and Shiarach, who are first language vernacular speakers of Gaelic in the Western Isles of Scotland. So they're Indigenous to that place, and they have just recently, over the last year, got together and are starting to stand their rights for their homeland and their language. And I was just about to say, do you have a message for them? But I think you may just have given us it.
Look, my message is raise the flag, raise our language flag to the heavens. We need to fight. We need to be resilient. We need to be steadfast in understanding. We know when you've had access to your language, you have the opportunity to have a mirror, to have a window into the world of our culture like no other. And we need to commit, we need to be ready to have the fight and to do whatever's required to ensure that our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren can likewise be able to be standing tall and confident and competent in all that they can be through their language and culture. That is that we need to do whatever we can to make sure that they have that right and that legacy. So I would say to those whānauka, to those relations and those isles, raise the flag, dig that pole into the ground, stand resolute and strong, and know that what they do, they also do for all of us all around the world, because that is the kind of tenacity and strength that we all need to we all need to feel and we all need to be a part of.
Wonderful. Oh, Kate Mila Tangers and Jean, thank you so much for that. Just before we go then, I would just like to say that has been a wonderful korerorerorero, which is my favourite Maori word of all time. It's the word for conversation, I believe, and it is the most onomatopoeic word the human race has ever spoken. It's wonderful. And thank you so much for your time. Great to see you again, and really hope we can catch up soon, and perhaps you'll tune into our future episodes. Just to say thanks very much to everyone for watching. This has been Dr Hana O'Regan from Aotearoa, New Zealand. I've been Àdhamh MacLeòid here at Independence Live, and on behalf of Dòrlach, this has been Tahu's Indigenous Perspectives. And Kiet Mila Tang Reish, to Hana, I guess the Holy Dunya Hagarach Gershaw. Thanks very much to Hana and to everyone who's watched, and we'll see you next time.
Kia ora, noho ora mai. Hei konara.
Lana Kharaj, Slamli. Oh, I seen Gaster Fat Thursday Noon Good Glan. Just getting a chance to watch back to the conversation there. What a thrilling conversation with Hana. What a laugh we had as well, just comparing notes on parenting. Hope you all enjoyed, everyone who's watching. Great privilege to be able to bring you these chats from Tahu's Indigenous Perspectives. Next month, August 10th, we are going to have another guest in, and our guest will be Marissa Phillips, who's an Indigenous artist and language activist from the Tūnaka people in British Columbia in Canada. You can see a little of our art here on the screen. Absolutely fantastic stuff. Her art just blows me away. I can't wait to get stuck into talking to her about that, talking to her about how she went about collecting language from the elders in her community, and about life and lore and all sorts of other good stuff. So that will be next month's chat on August 10th. I really hope you can join us for that. This has been Tahu's Indigenous Perspectives. Misha Àdhamh MacLeòid. Good night and cheers for now.